The Wall Street Journal does report that Iran told U.S. and Arab diplomats that it didn't care if its counterstrike started a war. Jordan's foreign minister was in Iran yesterday for a meeting, and President Biden is scheduled to speak with Jordanian King Abdullah II. But there has been very little public Iranian interaction with those trying to avert a crisis. With this in mind, Israel is taking steps to prepare for prolonged conflict. As reports indicate, the initial Iranian response could come in waves and include extensive missile and drone attacks. A document sent to mayors of northern cities told officials to prepare for water outages, power cuts, and evacuations. And in Jerusalem, an underground command bunker for government officials was opened by the Shin Bet security agency. Preparations for war in the north, and with Iran coming with fighting inside the Gaza Strip, you have Israeli negotiators in the region traveling to Cairo, Egypt this weekend for talks about a possible ceasefire.
We could literally be on the verge, possibly within hours from now, of yet another new war in the Middle East breaking out. And this situation is lining up to be a lot worse than when we barely averted war last April, after Israel assassinated some Iranian folks who were in the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and they had that big 350 drone missile response that the Iron Dome and the U.S. Air Force completely shot down. We averted war then because it was a one-off. This is lining up not to be that way. And as Trey Inks just mentioned in that article there, or that report there, that many people in Iran are allegedly telling Western interlocutors that this time they don't care if it starts a war, they're going to retaliate hard. And to try and unpack a lot of this, we have a great guest here, Matthew Ho, former State Department official, current associate director of the Eisenhower Media Network, and combat veteran. Welcome back to the show, Matt. We got a lot of things to unpack today.
Hi, Danny. Good to see you. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it felt this way 110 years ago, right? In August 1914, did it feel this way? With where we're at and staring at what the possibilities might be. We're in a very historical moment, to say the least.
You know, Matt, what a lot of people don't know about in the start of World War I is not just that the system of mutual support kind of started a chain reaction, but what is lesser known is that the situation between Austria and the Hungarian Empire was supposed to be a small thing, but it was exacerbated because the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand didn't just start the war, but it was used by the other side to say, hey, we've been looking for an opportunity to punish these guys, and we're going to take this one now. And then everything spiraled out of control. This right now is being talked about like it's just a response to something, an assassination that Israel did against actually quite a few people in both Iran and in Lebanon. But this could spiral out of control even worse because a lot of the same things are at play today as it was in 1914.
Right. And there's a lot of chest thumping across the region that has been occurring for quite a while now. And it gets to kind of the same point I think you had 110 years ago, where it becomes like a put up or shut up, as well as the anxiety that's produced by worrying what the other side's going to do. I'm sure people are familiar with that concept from the First World War, that, oh my God, the Germans are mobilizing, the Russians are mobilizing. It's going to take our trains. Barbara Tuchman writes about this so well in The Guns of August, right? It's going to take us X time to get our troops mobilized, get them on the trains, get the trains running, that kind of thing. And so if we don't do it now, then we are going to be behind our enemy. And that's the concern here, is you start wondering, will these nations act based upon their presumption of what might happen? So then you have, preemptive or presumptive attacks. But I think right now, it's safe to say we're waiting to see how Iran, Hezbollah, the Yemenis, the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, these various groups that are aligned, how they will play this hand that they have. I think my hope is that the Iranians are honest in what they're saying, that they want an action. They're going to conduct an action to reestablish deterrence, to reestablish stability. So this idea of attacking Israel, doing a show of force, most likely much larger than what we saw in April, maybe missile, drone, rocket strikes coordinated with Hezbollah and the Yemenis that last for a couple or a few days, cause some damage to Israel, take some lives, and then they say that's that, and the Israelis don't respond in a manner that produces this war that we're talking about. So another kind of tit for tat scenario. I think that's what we're all thinking is the best case. But as you said, Danny, the Iranians this time are saying quite clearly as well, we're okay with going to war, and that's a very scary statement.
A couple of things here, though, that are mitigating against the best case scenario.
It's a terrible best case scenario.
It is. That just really shows what state we're in when that is the best case scenario that we're clinging hope to and probably won't get. And
right.
There's a couple things, and obviously there's many, but two of them I want to talk about today. One is Orwell has apparently shown up and is alive and well, and especially in Washington and Tel Aviv. And there's so many things that are so, wait a minute, what did he just say? Because when you look at the actions and the words, they are so almost diametrically opposed. That's not going to help out situation. And then the second thing is that, does Israel want to have a situation to where, what you just described as the best case scenario where they don't respond? Because there's a lot of argument to be made that they have precipitated this with the specific assassinations in large number in recent days, where they've been killing a lot of key figures, especially that the political leader for Hamas, who was in the process of allegedly seeking a negotiated settlement, some kind of ceasefire, et cetera, that everyone claims on the Western side they want. And yet, if you assassinate the one guy you're working with to try and bring it about on the other side, it sounds to me like you're trying to kill any chance of a negotiated settlement.
Could you imagine what could you do to disrupt or destroy negotiation chances than what they did? Like what could be a better way of going about making sure negotiations don't go forward and pushing war than to assassinate your opponent's chief negotiator? I mean, what else says we're not negotiating by killing the guy? The other aspect you got to put into this, there's multiple things, of course, but one thing that stands out is the timing and the fact that, as you and I spoke about this, Benjamin Netanyahu came to the United States. He got the American Congress to kneel and kiss his ring. He had meetings with the president, the vice president, the Republican contender, the former president, and then he came back, and a few days later, all this happened. So that timing there as well is very important to show that at the very least, Netanyahu did not run into any type of resistance from the Americans that meant anything at all. And more than likely, he got them to nod along and say, I'm sure he didn't tell them exactly what they're going to do, but to give this general sense of security that Israel would have from the Americans. I mean, there are all these things put into place, this idea that Israel is looking for this war, or the powers that be in Israel are looking for this war, and they just might get it.
Now, here, let me show you now the first of what's going to be a few different Orwellian comments. First of all, we're going to start off in Israel with one of their chief spokesmen, Daniel Hagari. Watch this.
Hezbollah's ongoing aggression and brutal attacks are dragging the people of Lebanon and the entire Middle East into a wider escalation. While we prefer to resolve hostilities without a wider war, the IDF is fully prepared for any scenario.
So we prefer to resolve these things, with diplomacy and talk, et cetera, but we're prepared when, as you just pointed out, they've taken every action in the world to sabotage any possibility for peace. And the only, I guess I'd say, plausible definition of what he said there, because he didn't actually use the word negotiation in that last part anyway. He said we choose to resolve this without a bigger war. Maybe he means we choose to be able to take any action we want and for there to be no consequences and there not to be a bigger war, but we kick everybody out and defeat all the people that we don't like. Maybe that's what he meant.
Yeah, I think that's probably a better interpretation or a better reading of their statements. Certainly, yeah, you can't look at this and not understand it in any other way. That the Israelis, either because they have reached that point. I mean, this is something that Netanyahu and his clique, if you will, have been arguing for our entire adult lives, Danny. I mean, like this guy has been around, and his also too that part of the Likud party has been around for since the last 30 some odd years, arguing against any form of peace, arguing against any form of settlement, certainly arguing against any type of stability in the region that would come from a normalization of relations with Iran, or a two-state solution to the Palestinian issue. I mean, so here we are at that culmination. When are they going to have a better time to launch this war than now? They have a lame duck American president who still has 5 months left in office. They are in the midst of a general election campaign where neither candidate is ever at all going to go against Israel, and they will only offer their support while mouthing all the requisite niceties and politeness about wanting to see diplomacy, peace, etc. So for the Israelis, this is a really great position to be in to carry out the culmination of decades of not just rhetoric, but policy, both domestic and foreign, that have led to this point. And then, of course, you have those as well that believe just in the ideology, the Zionist ideology, the concept of greater Israel. And this, of course, is something that has to be accomplished in this great battle to secure that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to move to the next example of Orwell. And there's a worse one coming, by the way. I'll just kind of set you up for that. But this is a spokesman for the Pentagon who's talking about sending troops. Now, notice the difficult way to try and rationalize what we're sending troops, and the other message if we're trying to find a negotiated settlement out. Watch this.
The Pentagon is moving significant assets to the region to prepare for what may be another need to defend Israel from an attack, while simultaneously we are working very hard to de-escalate this situation diplomatically, because we do not believe that a regional war is in anyone's interest in the current moment, and that is something that we've been trying to avoid since October 7th. We are doing everything possible to make sure that this situation does not boil over, even in the context of providing significant assets, U.S. assets, and the help of other countries to defend Israel should the need arise again.
I'm sorry, that's actually a White House national security advisor person in that office there, not the spokesman. But nevertheless, you see the juxtaposition there. You see that, first of all, the words that he used were important. Right at the beginning of that, he said, if the need comes to defend Israel again, we'll have to do this. And I was like, hang on. Do we have a military agreement to mutual defense treaty with Israel? We don't. There is no reason why we should get involved in this war. And he's saying it as a matter of course, as though obviously if anybody does anything to Israel, we have to go in and help. And we don't have to go in and help. We should not go in and help. And by the way, that's the reason why we've been sending $3.8 billion every year to Israel, so that they can defend themselves. Where did this nonsense come up that we have to do anything, especially if Israel spawned this attack?
Right. This is the trap that we have made for ourselves in terms of our Israel policy for the last 7 decades. We have created this trap. And this, of course, is a result of our legalized system of bribery here in the United States and our politics. So Israel's just taking advantage of our corrupt political nature here. But after 7 decades, it has evolved. It has reinforced itself. It's built, into what we see now. Where exactly the case, where without any treaty, any formal alliance, it's just taking that the political will ensures that the United States will go to war in the Middle East alongside of Israel. And that's what the Israelis are banking on. They're banking on the Americans being there, it's us and the Americans against the world. And for many of them, talking about rationales and motives before, but there's also a very religious rationale for a lot of this, a very superhuman type of cosmic historical rationale for all of this. And if it's just us against the world, that's how God meant it to be. It's just like history as before us. Here we are, and it is our time to defend our, our people, our ways, in the way our ancestors had to. I mean, it's a trope that writes itself. It's a narrative that writes itself. But the thing about this for the Americans is not only just how kind of strategically unwise this is on a number of levels, but also, militarily, is the United States able to actually do this? Do we have the capabilities to wage this war? I mean, we have a position right now where we can only put one aircraft carrier in that region. I guess if things got bad, we could move other ones. But even with 11 aircraft carriers, we can't have more than one aircraft carrier there at a time, because we're just stretched. We're overextended. We're stretched out, as well as just the upkeep, the maintenance on our machinery, the consumption in our stocks and inventories, our manpower issues make it so that of 11 aircraft carriers, we only have one there right now at the Teddy Roosevelt, and she's been there for quite a while. I don't know if she's going to be there as long as the Eisenhower was, but and she's going to be replaced by the Abraham Lincoln. But it's not like you're going to have two carriers on station. I mean, when we did the Iraq War and other things, we had 3 or 4 carriers on station, plus massive amounts of land-based aircraft as well. So we just simply don't have the wherewithal to wage this war in a manner that you would expect from the cheerleaders from it.
I'm actually I'm gonna get to a cheerleader here in just a second. I'm glad you brought that up. It's perfect transition. But before I do that, because I think the issue you're talking about right here is really important, and this underscores why it is vital that we follow the United States Constitution and the 1973 War Powers Act, so that we're a nation governed by the rule of law. Because if there were hearings, if we said that, okay, the administration, the president of the United States does not have the authority to unilaterally send American military wherever he sees fit, which is what we're on course for right now. No one's even talking about we should go to Congress before the president takes action with these forces that he's talking about moving, that could absolutely draw us into a war that no one has even debated. And that's why it should go to the U.S. Congress, so that we can talk about the issues you just raised about the fact that we don't have the personnel, we don't have the ammunition, we can't get into a war right now and still maintain all of our other requirements everywhere else, especially a war that has nothing to do with our national interests. But we're following none of those things here. And we do have, Matt, I think in all truth, we have to say we have, I don't know, you can call it an autocracy, you can call it a monarchy, where the monarch gets to decide how the armed forces is used, et cetera. But that is practically what exists right now. It's not a democracy.
And the worst time for it, in the midst of a tight election race, with a debilitated, lame duck president. This is the worst absolute time for a war politically, in terms of executive authority and executive decision making. This is shaping up to be nothing more than a nightmare. Hopefully, like we were discussing, this is nothing more than another tit for tat, right? That is just a larger version of what we saw in April, which was a larger version of, say, what we saw in January 2020 or whenever. Hopefully, but here we are now, Danny, you and I, talking about strategies of hope, and where that gets us. And this idea that somehow, if you look at all the historical examples, and we'll just go back to World War I, since we're talking about it, and that's easy and people are familiar with it. Nothing went the way anyone thought it was. All the great minds, all the experts, all the commentators on the time, they weren't on YouTube, but they were in the newspapers. This would all be done by Christmas. And I think that's been the case for war after war after war. I mean, even look at what's occurring in Gaza. I'm sure in the White House last fall, the assumption was the Israelis would be done by Christmas, that this genocide, this ethnic cleansing in Gaza would last for a few months, and then it would be over. The idea, I think, if you were to transport yourself back 6 months, 9 months ago, and said in Washington, D.C., the genocide is still going to be going on. The Israelis, are going to be killing scores and scores of Palestinians daily, and continuing to destroy what's left of the of Gaza, at the time of the Democratic National Convention, people would think you're crazy. People wouldn't believe you. But that's the reality of it.
Here
And
we
so
are.
I think we have to take that of like, this is, and just this idea about fighting this war. Again, I mean, one example I'll give for people to understand how bad off we are. We're outsourcing now to the Japanese production of Patriot missiles. We can't produce enough Patriot missiles, so we're now going to be paying the Japanese not to produce, the Japanese can produce them for themselves, but we're actually be paying the Japanese now to produce missiles for us because we can't produce enough Patriot missiles. And you're talking about maybe 30 a year or something like that.
Yeah,
which
it's minimal.
that'll go up in a
that's
night.
like one drone wave, and you might not be able to get them all down with that. You mentioned cheerleaders here, and I think it's more pernicious than some may believe and understand. And I want to explain why on the backside. But here's the chief cheerleader, General Keane.
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous. I mean, what Israel has done here, quite successfully, in rather rapid fashion, killing Mohammed Deif, the military commander of Hamas, and also Fuad Shakur, a military commander, obviously, of Hezbollah, and now the chief political negotiator and political spokesperson for Hamas, Hanayeh. And the fact that they've accomplished this, and the administration reacts to this, Mark, by wringing their hands, and their number one concern is about escalation, which in of itself shows a sign of weakness. And this has been the problem, from the outset, is that the horrific attack on October the 7th, Iran operationalized immediately all of the other proxies. On October the 8th, Hezbollah began to fire in northern Israel.
See, when you just watch that, you see, you hear that Israel is basically a victim. They're just sitting around doing nothing. They just want to have dinner and just kind of go about their lives. And all of a sudden, bam, out of nowhere, all these attacks keep coming on them. They keep hitting attack, and this little Israel needs our help here. And then he actually diminishes, Keane does, this thought. He says it seems like the administration's number one issue is to not have it to escalation. Like he doesn't want it to escalate. That itself is weakness. And I'm like, are you insane? That's actually what he's supposed to do, keep us out of wars. And you're saying that that's a weakness, as though we should just rush into any opportunity for war.
Well, he's a warmonger. I mean, that's just simply as that. He's got an attachment to war that's romantic, personal. There's probably some like childhood psychological reasons for it, and with that comes the warmongering, comes just the base level of dishonesty. So all his assertions there are incorrect. I mean, this assertion that Iran was involved with the October 7th attacks, as he implies, it's completely untrue. Hamas themselves have said Iran didn't know we were going to do this. Nobody knew we were going to do this. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, their counterpart in Gaza, didn't know they were going to do that on October 7th. I mean, but just one example of like the fundamental base dishonesty of people like Jack Keane, and from these absolutely incorrect and untrue assertions, they build a reality of the world that doesn't exist. So to Jack Keane, his response to all this, why we have to attack Iran, why we have to go to a war in the Middle East, is all in his mind, and in this narrative that he vomits out. This idea it's because Iran is up to these actions, because didn't you see what they did on October 7th? We have to do this. They're only going to do more. And so he just disregards the actual reality of what's occurring in order to shape this narrative for more war. And then you get into a chicken and egg thing over which comes first, his warmongering or his dishonesty. But, it doesn't really matter. I mean, but he represents an entire city, essentially. Danny, you're one of the few people in DC, one of the few honest, realistic people there. But he represents a whole city, a whole industry, a whole empire, and the way that they will manufacture their view, to ensure that war is the outcome. I mean, he's very reliable in that way. And it just also shows, too, the way he rattles off how Israel has killed these people. I mean, anyone who knows anything about any of this stuff, killing leaders doesn't really work. I'm sure Jack Keane, was saying 2011 how killing bin Laden was the end of Al Qaeda, right? And then of course Al Qaeda went on to great success in terms of their how much they spawned in the years afterwards, leading up to, including capturing whole cities and parts of Syria. Their spawn, right? I mean, just those type, the base assertions these people make are fundamentally incorrect, not backed by history or evidence.
We assassinated al-Zarqawi, the leader of Al Qaeda in Iraq, and that spawned ISIS. Then we killed, Baghdadi, and that now they just replaced him. Every time they do, it means nothing except that it means that they're for sure going to retaliate and shoot back. And so,
there was a report this weekend out of Israel on the website is Ynet, but I won't try and pronounce the actual name of the newspaper in Hebrew. But the report is that Israeli military has taken 10,000 casualties in Gaza, about 700 killed and the rest wounded, which is about right, which was about our casualty ratios in Iraq and Afghanistan, 1 in 8, 1 in 9. But a much smaller force, primarily composed of reservists in a very tight community. I mean, I think that's one of the things that people have to remember about these Israeli soldiers who are fighting in Gaza. Their families are just 20, 30, 40 kilometers away, right? Yeah. They can leave Gaza and within a half-hour drive be sitting on their couch eating ice cream and watching Netflix in a society where, of course, this is very stressful for the society. It's happening right there, but they're still insulated from it to a great degree. These rocket and missile and drone strikes that are coming from Iran and Hezbollah and the Yemenis, of course, are going to upset that. But I mean, so these assertions about how well things are going for the Israelis, just simply not the case. But that's the go back to, it was Plato or whoever, right? The first casualty of war is truth.
Okay, and let's go back now. We have a combination of Orwell and the first casualty of truth in this next clip here, and this is just amazing. Let me set it up for you. This is John Kirby, and this is in the immediate aftermath of when the political leadership for Hamas, with whom our side, meaning Israel and Qatar and several others, were negotiating to try and find a ceasefire. In the light of Israel assassinated the guy that they were having negotiation with. Here's how John Kirby characterizes things.
All of this adds to the complicated nature of what we're trying to get done. And what we're trying to get done is a ceasefire deal that can get you 6 weeks in phase one, get a lot of hostages, the most at-risk, out of there and home with their families, and get some more humanitarian assistance in. Based on the constructive conversations that we had with the Prime Minister last week, we still believe that this is a worthy endeavor. We still believe that the gaps can be narrowed, the details can be fleshed out, and a deal can be had. Now, again, it's too soon to know what these recent events over the last 24, 48 hours are going to do to the process. I don't want to sound overly sanguine here, but we still believe the deal on the table is worth pursuing, and the hostages need to come home, and we're not going to stop trying to work on that.
How can you stand there before God and country and say, we still think that this is a good deal? We had a talk with Netanyahu before he assassinated the guy that we're trying to have a deal with, but we still think a deal could be had. I mean, what more needs to happen before you say we're being played and you're being used? The U.S. Armed Forces is being used as an extension of the IDF for their purpose, and you're playing along with it.
Well, that's because no one else is going to stand in that position, right? You need someone like Kirby with that degree of arrogance, entitlement, just an inability to feel shame, to lie so earnestly and easily. And what the thing about it is, it's self-producing, it's self-reinforcing. So what those who are throughout the American government or throughout the United States who want to eventually be in that position, be a future John Kirby, behind that podium representing the President of the United States on national security affairs, they have to understand that the way I get there is by being willing to, piss on someone's leg and tell them it's raining, right? And do it shameless and do it without shame, do it without any type of concern that what I'm doing here is fundamentally incorrect. These are people who believe that the ends justify the means. And in this sense, It's, ensuring the well-being of the narrative of the American empire. Because I can't even say that they're trying to ensure the well-being of the American empire, because everything they're doing is self-destructive. It's
Right.
really about ensuring that the political narrative in the moment. And so, yeah, I mean, it just is. It's one of these things you watch. The other aspect you have to remember too is that the reason why we're doing this here on StreamYard, right, is that the American corporate media, for the most part, is completely in line, in bed, in cahoots, complicit, whatever, with the rest of the empire.
Yeah, I mean, why didn't anybody on MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, when he made that statement, say, "Wait a minute, it's completely contradicted by what just
Makes no
happened"?
sense.
How do you square those two things together? No one asked the question.
Right. And the other aspect too is just this whole idea of occasionally they'll pop up and make a question about, well, if this is what you believe, why are you continuing to give them billions of dollars? Why are you continuing to give the Israelis tens of thousands of bombs? But we see that there's an alignment within these elites. What's good for those next to me is good for me, as well as to the fear of losing their position in the elites, that they could be replaced. And we just saw this, was it today or yesterday? Semaphore published an article. They have documentation, they have emails from the Wall Street Journal that if you go back to January, when the Wall Street Journal read in their big pieces on how the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, the organization that provides assistance in Palestine, was co-opted by Hamas, that their people were full of Hamas agents and everything else. And that, along with the New York Times report, were the two primary pieces of evidence that got nations around the world to turn off their funding for UNRWA. And now, of course, the only nation that has not resumed their funding for UNRWA is the United States. The Brits actually did it a week or two ago with their new government, because there is no evidence whatsoever for the Israeli allegations that UNRWA was connected to Hamas. Now, what we've seen with the Semaphore report that came out today, or again, maybe it was yesterday, the Wall Street Journal itself, their head of standards, so their top fact checker, there's an email from this guy saying, yeah, we have no evidence that any of this took place. We have no evidence to support any of Israel's allegations. But then, just as Kirby does, he says that doesn't mean that it's not true, though. Right? So this whole
we have no evidence, but we're going to go ahead and publish this stuff that claims it is.
Right. So when Kirby's speaking like this, he's speaking knowing that he has allies that he can link arms with, in this case, the Times, CNN, the Journal, whoever, who are going to promote these narratives unabashedly. And then even when they're called out, whether it's right away, weeks later, a month later, years later, they'll just continue to insist that they're correct. So in this case with the Journal, even though, they're saying we don't have any evidence that what we said was correct, we are committing just gross journalistic malpractice here, essentially, right? I mean, then Kirby knows that, the American government knows that, the empire knows that, and the Wall Street Journal keeps its place.
Matt, I want to go back to something you said a second ago, which I think is really important to talk about here. You said that a lot of these elites will be doing this out of self-preservation because they want to replicate themselves, et cetera. Right. But there's a situation evolving here right now where this could absolutely blow up in their faces and they won't be able to benefit from this at all. I want to look at a bit. You mentioned a little bit of this at the outset. I want to follow through a little bit more detail on it here, in that what is potentially going to come out here is not just that Iran is going to do something, but that it's going to do something in, if not a sustained degree, multiple waves of something. But it could also be coordinated with Hezbollah, because they also had some of their senior people assassinated at the same time. So if they take any kind of action, and then if you add in the Yemenis down there too, this could overwhelm the Iron Dome system. And I suspect that, and I'm going to show you a bit of what MIT Professor Ted Postal said on our show back in April when the whole thing with the Iron Dome first happened, that he said it is not anywhere near as effective as what you think it is. I think that the Israelis may be aware of that. That's why at the outset of this, on that Trey Yingst thing here, he reported that the Israeli government, is telling their people to prepare for some serious attacks the water could go out, electricity could go out, get in your bomb shelters, because I think they are aware of how limited their ability is to actually defend if there's a concerted missile attack. And for those who may not know, I want to show you a couple of things that Ted Postal said on our show back April. Roll tape 1 first. All of this seems to imply to me that while it's a great PR victory for the Israeli side, and you saw Hagari there, basically saying that we knocked everything down, just a little bit came through. But the issue is, if they're not prepared, if they don't get advance warning and they get swarmed, that they could run out of interceptor missiles pretty quick. And if your reports of using half their interceptors is true, then a bigger one, I mean, they could run it, and then the Iranian side could really hit anything it wanted to at that point if they lose that, right?
I think exhaustion, as we sometimes call it, when you exhaust the defense, which we've seen in Ukraine now. If you exhaust the defense, then there is no defense. As long as you're willing to sacrifice
large
drones,
numbers. Yeah,
and they have to shoot at the drones. See, that's why having a significant warhead on the drone, even if it's not 1,000 pounds, but 100 pounds is enough to destroy a radar or do significant damage to a communication facility.
What he continued to say on there, Matt, was that when he did a forensic analysis of what actually happened that day, is that hardly any of the missiles actually were intercepted. Many of them simply malfunctioned, but we cannot count on that happening the next time. And he also said that most of the drones were fired at places they knew. The Iranians knew that the Iron Dome system was set up so that they would get shot down, because they didn't want to escalate. They didn't want a bigger war. So they attacked targets they knew that was not success. But he said, had they chose, Ted Postal said, had the Iranians chose different targets where there is not as good a coverage, or if they had fired at some cities, even if they got intercepted, or if the warheads fell apart, it would cause a lot of casualties. If Iran does that this time and has multiple waves to where Israel may not even have enough interceptor missiles, they could be potentially defenseless and suffer great harm.
Right, particularly if you see a multi-day attack. So by the third day, where's Israel at with its stocks? So, another important thing in that episode in April was the role of American, British, Jordanian aircraft, as well as American Patriot interceptors, THAAD interceptors, probably SM-2s off of ships, or SM-6s. I'm not sure which ones, but you have that. I mean, that's one of the things where the other day when they talked about the U.S. sending the Abraham Lincoln, they're also sending a host of other ships, and you always have other ships with a carrier battle group, but I think you have even more now. 12 would be an extremely large carrier battle group. Usually you're talking about 5 or 6. So what are those ships going to be doing? It's missile defense. They can also fire Tomahawk cruise missiles at targets in Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, etc. But the primary thing is going to be providing that missile defense, because the Americans, the Brits, Jordanians shot down a lot of those drones and missiles in April. So that what Postal was saying there was that the Israelis really didn't shoot down that many. They still shot down some, but they used a lot of their weapon systems. And so you get to this point where you're on the third day of attacks from Yemen, from Iran, from Lebanon. I'm sure that PIJ and Hamas in Gaza will do everything they can to be supportive of that attack as well. It does. What happens on that third day? I mean, that I think is the other thing too, is that we'll wait and see when this attack happens. It could it'll be getting dark there in a little bit. It could be tonight, or maybe it'll be a month from now. Unlike the West, folks in the Middle East tend to have a little more patience than us. And that's certainly what's not going to happen. I can't imagine it's going to happen. But unlike in April, when the Israelis gave about a 3 days heads up that the attack was coming, including the fact that actually when they launched the attack, making announcements that we fired off our drones, knowing the drones had like a 7-hour flight time.
Yeah, exactly.
So
every advantage in the
time.
world was given to Israel because they didn't want to, but I can't imagine. In fact, one other thing that Professor Postal said in that interview there was, he said, a rattlesnake may be small compared to, a bigger opponent, But he said, if you kick that rattlesnake, something may happen. Watch this.
Mm-hmm.
An attack on Iranian soil? Should that be part of the plan?
It should be. Of course it should be. Absolutely. We're not talking about a go-to-war attack on Iran that we've seen before when we lit up Baghdad. Nobody's advocating anything like that. When the administration says, well, we don't want to escalate, we don't want to widen the war, and no one wants a war with Iran, well, of course, no one's proposing a war with Iran, but holding Iran accountable in terms of some of the IRGC assets, the leadership and their physical assets themselves in a limited, measured way makes sense, and letting them know that we won't stop there.
So let me ask you, in a limited and measured way, as Keen said there, is that even feasible?
They may show you that it's not worth your while. If you want to kick a rattlesnake, you want to bet that it's not going to strike back. The idea that Iran is defenseless is just delusional. You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with their government. You don't have to think they're good guys, but you don't have to like a rattlesnake, but you have to respect it. And these guys show no respect. I mean, that's why we're in all these wars. We're in all kinds of wars.
If anybody in the government ever listens to this kind of nonsense and actually takes action on it, then the rattlesnake is going to do what a rattlesnake does. It's going to strike back and hit something that you don't want them to hit. And once that genie's out of that bottle, it could be bad for everybody. See, and Matt, and that's one of the things I'm worried about. That my last comment there was, once that genie's out of the bottle, all kinds of things happen. This goes back to your World War I analogy at the beginning here. And one of the things that's not been talked about here, we talked about Iran, Hezbollah, and Yemen. There's a fourth actor here that's just, I think, within the last 12 hours came over there. And that is former Minister of Defense Shoigu from Russia has gone to Tehran, reportedly to make new defense issues. This also opens the possibility of what Putin said months ago when our terrible policy in Ukraine, whereas we told the Ukrainians they can use whatever they want of our stuff to attack into Russia. And then Putin said, hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if you've done that, we're going to mirror that, and that we will now consider giving your opponents weapons. Now, we know for sure that Iran has given lots of stuff to Russia. So especially given that Shoigu just showed up here at this time, I think it's probably reasonable to suggest that that's probably going to happen, that they probably have some weapons to give to to Iran, and things could go a lot worse than people are thinking here.
Well, the Russians have made this statement a number of times now, going back months at this point. So it's quite possible it's already underway. This idea that if you want to continue this war in Ukraine, if you want to continue to provide weapons that are killing our people, we are going to give weapons that will kill your people to, around the world. And so, not just to Iran. But does that mean that they're going to provide zircon missiles to the Yemenis? Would they provide S-400 air defense systems to Hezbollah? Like that type of thing, where the balance of technological power here could shift quite rapidly. So whereas you could say with, the Yemeni attacks on U.S. naval ships for the last 7 months, 8 months now, however long it's been, longer than that, I guess. They've been primarily using what we would consider outdated weapon systems, things that, of course, you have to take seriously, but that we can, with a relative degree of certainty, expect our defensive systems to defeat. But what if the Russians change that calculus? The same as with Hezbollah. We know they have a number of weapon systems. Many of them come from Iran. Many of them are self-manufactured. But the Israelis, up to this point, have, I guess, believed, and what we just saw Ted Postal talking about, saying they probably shouldn't feel this way, but they feel it with a degree of certainty that we can defend ourselves from Hezbollah weapon systems. Well, what happens if Russia changes that calculus as well? And then the other factor, the other nation here that we need to talk about is Turkey. Certainly the chest thumping that has come from Erdogan. Would he get involved in this? He said last week Turkey would be involved. He said in a manner similar to the way they intervened in Libya and the way they intervened in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, that's primarily without providing troops. But does that mean that they're going to provide drone systems to Hezbollah, some of the most modern and effective drone systems in the world? Will they provide other systems? Could you get to a point where the Turks declare a no-fly zone over Beirut and put their own F-16s over Lebanon? I don't think we're going to see the Turkish army, which is the largest army in NATO after the Americans, I guess. It might be technically larger. I can't remember. But anyway, I don't think they're going to see the Turks march south. That would be interesting. The deal they'd have to strike. I don't even have to strike a deal with Assad. But, this idea of what can come, as well as the denial of what has already occurred, this denial that the Iranians say haven't prepared themselves, that they're not ready. Like we were just talking about that, that interview you showed with Postal there about kicking a rattlesnake. This notion that the Iranians haven't prepared themselves for this war for decades now, and we have shown our hand repeatedly throughout not the world, but in the Middle East in terms of our willingness to go to war. Just rattle out 5-6 different nations you could talk about where we've gone to war since the end of the Cold War. So why only if the Iranians were incredibly stupid or incredibly corrupt would they not have prepared for this? So we should expect that. We should expect, and then it should be the same thing too. Looking back, we should expect to see countries that have prepared for this do well. So just as, say, Assad prepared in Syria, Russia prepared against Ukraine, the Iranian preparations, we should put in the same light and understand the same way that this is something that we have to not undersell. We have to take this very seriously, that if this goes past, if our initial policies, our plans don't work, we've talked about this before too, Danny, right? Like what happens when our shock and awe doesn't work, or what happens when the desired outcome of shock and awe is not what our plan said it was going to be. And now, for example, in Iraq, we are facing an occupation and insurgency. Case after case, like, this idea that somehow we are going to completely decapitate the Iranian leadership by the end of week one, and that'll be the end of the war. What happens if that's the case? And then guess what? We're out of weapon systems. We're out of PRISM missiles. What happens then?
We don't have the capacity to just give an open-ended war for Israel to go into Lebanon, for example, to start a war with Iran, for example, and keep going with what we're doing in a Russia-Ukraine war, and keep sending stuff that we're sending into the Indo-Pacific, to Taiwan, and keep our own stocks up. We can't do all of those things. And instead of recognizing the limits of power and holy crap, this could go in a direction that's really bad, our leaders seem oblivious to this and are continuing to go forward. Matt, I know you only have a minute or two left here before you got to break contact to go to another media interview. But just if you could give one piece of advice that you think is realistic and possible, even at this 11th hour or maybe 11:59, what would it be to the White House? How can we get out of this before we get sucked into something big?
The people who are giving you advice, the Jack Keanes and their clique, the Democratic Party versions of Jack Keanes, for which there's a boatload of them. These men and women don't know what they're talking about. They are crackpot realists. They are fantasists. They are fabulous. They believe, we're just talking about with how our plans are. We're going to decapitate a leadership. They are wrapped up in their own world that is less realistic than playing around the Dungeons and Dragons when they do their war games. These people are manifesting a reality that exists in their own minds. Anything that runs counter to their narrative is dismissed out of hand. And they also have an incredible degree of conflicts of interests. These men and women who are going into the White House, who are advocating for war, have all types of financial ties where they benefit from continued war, expanded war, prolonged war. So you take this idea that they're crackpot realists, they're fantasists, they're fabulous, they're fundamentally dishonest, and they're greedy, and you put that together, and that on the whole are the men and women that are going into the White House. And so that's what I would advise the White House is you cannot listen to these people. Look, the evidence is all there. These are more or less the same people who have come into the White House for decades now. And look what they wrought. Look what they brought about. Look what they did. And you're still listening to them.
Well, we're not going to do that. So you can be sure at this channel, I'm sure anywhere else you're going on the air, we're going to tell it like it is. We're going to tell people the truth no matter what. And I just pray to God that enough people will listen, especially in the White House, before it's too late, because it may already be too late. We may have already overplayed our hand and played ourselves into a no-win situation. But until something happens, there's still a possibility with a little bit of sanity. And I just hope and pray that happens. But in any case, we really appreciate you coming on today, Matt, and providing real clarity on exactly what's at stake here and what needs to happen. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Danny.
And we thank you guys for coming on with us today as well. This is a dynamic situation. You can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you informed of everything that's going on right away. So if anything happens, it won't surprise you. But if anything continues to develop in the next hours or overnight, you can come back here and we will give you the update on exactly what's going on. Until then, please subscribe and like it so that other people can get a chance to see the same level of truth that you're enjoying. And we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.